Even after several days, we have not finished counting the votes for the 2024 election, and some states won't be done for maybe weeks. How can that be when other countries do it so much faster? It's just another thing that makes the US different than the rest of the world. To see how and why, join me for this brief look at the exceptionalism of American elections. The first clear difference to many countries is registration and the creation of voter rolls. Unlike in many places around the world, like Argentina, Brazil, Spain, or Australia, where enrollment is compulsory, or Mexico, where it might as well be, the United States not only does not force people to register, but it leaves that task to the states. That means that procedures are completely different from state to state, so that in order to vote in some, one must register at least 30 days before the election, like Ohio, Tennessee, Mississippi, and so on. In 21 others, one can register the day of the election, like California and Vermont, and in others, like North Dakota, one doesn't have to register at all. As long as one has valid ID, one can vote. How one can register also differs from state to state, so that in some one can do it online, in others one can't, in some one needs more documents than others, and so on. That means that a large portion of Americans never bother registering and thus never vote, which is part of the reason why the percentage of people that vote is always lower than the eligible population, and quite low compared to other countries. 2020, for example, was the highest turnout election in over 100 years, and it only reached two-thirds of eligible voters. The second difference is the sheer number of elections. Reforms in the 19th century made it so that local elections would not be run at the same time as federal ones. Likewise, similar efforts in the mid-20th century changed the way parties selected their candidates through primaries. That is, having the general electorate rather than party leaders select party nominees. These efforts mean that the United States has some kind of election every year, sometimes more than once in the same year, as primaries are usually held at least 6 months before the election. This is especially because the US loves to have elections for positions that other countries would never consider, like sheriffs, judges, coroners, school board members, mine inspectors, and transportation district board members, but also because some of these terms in office are quite short. In 12 states, for example, their state senators are elected for a mere 2 years. That includes Vermont and New Hampshire, who do likewise even for their governors. The third difference are electoral rules. Rather than having a uniform way to determine winners, guidelines differ widely depending on the election, the state, the city or county, and sometimes even the party. The one weird example people are probably most familiar with is the Electoral College, which is only used to determine the president, but in which each state can allocate their votes however they want. And 2 of them, Nebraska and Maine, decided to do it differently than everyone else, by congressional district. But then there's also the primaries that determine each party's nominees, whose method differs by state, as some use caucuses, elections where people do not use a ballot but have to physically convince others to support their preferred candidate, and others regular voting with secret ballots, but where delegates are assigned as winner-take-all or proportionality depending on the state and the party. Meanwhile, there's also runoffs in 3 states, Georgia, Louisiana, and Mississippi, where if no candidate gets 50% of the vote, another election must be held with only the top 2 vote-getters. And also ranked choice voting, similar to what they do in Australia, where people must rank their candidates. First choices are tabulated first, and based on this result, the last place finisher is eliminated, leading those votes to count for their second preferred choice until a single winner emerges. The final difference is the method of voting. How people can cast a ballot also differs by state. In the state of Oregon, for example, all voting is done by mail. In most other states, the option is usually in person, and voting by mail is reserved for people that cannot cast a ballot in person on election day, so-called absentee voting. Some states like Alabama, Arkansas, Connecticut, Indiana, and so on require voters to provide a valid excuse to be able to vote absentee, while others like Virginia do not care. In addition, in the majority of states you can vote early, on average about 2 weeks before election day, but with many variations. In Vermont, as early as 45 days before, while in Oklahoma, voters have less than a week. Meanwhile, Alabama and New Hampshire do not allow any early voting at all. As it happens, the combination of all of the above also makes it so that we do not have complete results for quite a while, because on top of all the different rules to cast a ballot, there are also regulations on how these are counted. Some states, for example, allow mail-in voting ballots to be counted prior to election day. Others do not. Others, like Michigan, allow some counties to count early but not others. And yet others, like Arizona, do not even allow election officials to retrieve ballots from secure voting drop boxes until after Election Day. Plus, they all have different ways to ensure ballots are not cast by ineligible voters or people pretending to be someone else, such as by verifying signatures. On top of it, the period allowed to count these also varies. Most states allow 7 days, but California grants 30 days. And that's why American elections are what they are, a combination of federalism, long-standing institutions and tradition, as well as voter preferences.